Well, good evening, everyone. So good to see you all. My gosh. Good evening, everyone watching live and on the recording. My name is Michael Hahn. Welcome to Pacific Alumni Craft Talks, or PACT, as we like to call it. I'm your host, Michael Hahn. I'm an essayist and fiction writer who graduated Pacific MFA in 2022. So what is PACT? What are we doing here? Well, a group of us had an idea to spotlight Pacific MFA alums who are in the wild and are publishing across all the genres. But as many of you know, publishing can be kind of a mixed bag, right? While some of us have been fortunate to be published, there are still many of us who have published in great journals and small presses whose resources can be found wanting, right, when it comes to having the conversations our pieces deserve. And so that's where we step in. We're hoping to push that conversation a little bit further. Tonight, we're featuring writers Maureen Bhutong Boyd and Allison Macy Steines in conversation with Atina Hartunian and Kate Wiley. Please stick around at the end when our classmate Mike Ataya, editor-in-chief of Dirtbag and bard of Dirtbags at Large, will close us out with an invitation to submit to our Substack. Oh, and please go nuts with the chat. Shout out your favorite lines, what authors and books are resonating with you during the conversation, and please post any questions you might have for the Q&A after each interview. So let's begin. I'll introduce our first interviewer. Atina Hartunian is a first-generation Armenian-American creative writer and storyteller, a 2023 grad from Pacific MFA. Atina was a resident of the Cambridge Writers Workshop in New Orleans and a founding fellow of the ANAFRA writing program in LA. I'll give Atina the honors of introducing the talented Maureen Bhutong Boyd. Atina, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, all. So great to see everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing Maureen. Maureen Bhutong Boyd is a Thai-Scottish North American writer and editor and uses the pronouns she and her. Maureen worked as a union organizer and leader of campaigns around the United States for over 15 years before she received her MFA in fiction from Pacific University. Her stories appear in The Pinch, Bellingham Review, Joyland Magazine, and Buckham Journal, amongst others. She read from her unpublished novel at Aperture Kearney Street's Workshops Festival for Emerging Asian Pacific American Artists, and another excerpt was a finalist for Hidden River Arts' William Van Wert Award for Fiction. She also wrote and performed an autobiographical monologue for This Is My Body, a storytelling showcase for women of color in the California Bay Area. Thank you so much, Maureen, for being our first guest in our PACT series here. I'd like to invite you to read your piece before we dive into it.
Sure. And thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be the first. So, all right. This is Dating White Men, number 2. I don't kiss using the same mouth I read poetry in, you said. And of course, I immediately wondered about your use of prepositions. Like, why would your mouth read poetry in, as opposed to using your mouth to read poetry with? And I suppose I missed the point of your somewhat eroticized self-revelation, but I feel like there should be limitations on white men speaking like this, because their mere presence can evacuate poetic resonance from otherwise beautiful language. And since white men have tried to colonize beauty forever, I think it is only appropriate today for them to stay far, far away from poetic language and to limit themselves to clear-spoken, hyper-literal sentences with complete punctuation and no metaphors whatsoever. Are you telling me I can't write poetry? I literally do not have the power to prevent you from writing poetry, unlike all of your forebears who definitely had the power to prevent everyone who was not like them from writing poetry, novels, newspaper articles, textbooks, the New York Times crossword, legislation, college essays, prescriptions, billboards, soup can labels, product recalls, vacuum cleaner instructions, job ads, and more. So that if you really think about it, suggesting that you should voluntarily limit yourself to the unmetaphorical is not that much of a deprivation, given the fact that the poetic is only one item in this myriad list of texts that people like you have had exclusive control over for forever in this country, starting with your arrival and your decision to slaughter people who did not write English or Spanish or Italian or French or Portuguese on paper. Actually, probably vellum, because your forebears felt that writing things on paper, I mean vellum, in one of those languages was the only legitimate way to communicate things of grave importance, like instructions for drowning an accused witch to prove she wasn't a witch, or how to evaluate the price of another human being. So that I don't really feel like it's unreasonable to suggest that perhaps you should withdraw from one of these arenas of language and go find something else to do, like maybe plant a vegetable garden or crochet clothes or give free rides to people who really need these things. What do you think?
Brilliant. Oh my God. I'm gonna start with my little interview here. Okay, so tell me about how this piece kind of came together for you.
Well, I like host a generative writing session on Zoom Friday mornings with some friends of mine, and a friend brought the prompt, and she brought a prompt that was something like, I don't kiss or I don't sing with the same mouth that it was something, it started like that. And I decided to write on that. And as I was thinking about it and reading through it, I was like, this is very eroticized, right? Who says this? And what does it mean for someone to engage in erotic language? And like, is it different if I say it? Or, the 87-year-old woman sitting next to me says it? Or, the 15-year-old guy? And as I sort of thought about this, I thought about eroticism and power. And then we got to patriarchy. And there you go. That's the rest of it.
I mean, do these things really occupy your mind and your writing and your writing voice as you're like working on other pieces?
Yeah, I would say they do. Anybody who knows me knows I'm concerned with the political, I'm concerned with power. And we are not often as creative people. It is not always encouraged to really talk about the political and power and social relations, but I think we all are born into it. There is no place that is outside of power. There is no place that is outside of power relations. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. Both of my parents are immigrants from two very different places in the world. And so their experiences, which are very specific to their situation in this world, both overlap and are very different because of their relationships to power. So it's personal too.
So I guess what I want to know is like, when at your time at Pacific, did that kind of through line and political philosophy, was that more honed and encouraged? How did that really develop in your writing practice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I came with all of this to Pacific. It was a time of change in the program. And so a lot of us were talking about these questions and thinking about these questions. I was not unique in any way, shape, or form. I was just part of a larger discourse already taking place. But one of the things that was very much honed and that I learned through the process of the MFA program was, if you want to talk about the political or the social, you really have to talk about it in a way that people can hear, right? No one wants to be lectured. It's totally boring. No one wants to be clubbed over the head with judgment or, flat, uninteresting characters. And so one of the things I learned through the practice of craft is, how do I reach all readers? That's the point, right? For me, that's the point of writing and creating, is I want to get stories out to people. And how do I get the things I care about, the things I want to say, heard by people? And it starts with empathy, and it starts with learning how to craft empathetic characters and complex characters. And even when people might be unfamiliar with the circumstances of those characters.
Totally. And I see it in this piece. I mean, the first time I read it, and I've read it several times since then, it's very clear the whole, patriarchal argument that's being sifted within the protagonist's language, but it's not coming off as pedantic. It's not coming off as argumentative. It's coming off in this really casual and conversational tone. And that is something I so appreciated from reading this 1,001 times, because it's the argument is like laid out so well. And I wanted to kind of shift a little bit to talk about some of the craft elements I saw in your piece. One of them being and I had to write this down, guys, because I cannot articulate this, because some of the words are really hard to to say, and I just jumble it up. But I mean, I really loved your sentence structures. And that's something that I'm kind of going on my own little rabbit hole journey on after MFA, is really trying to understand syntax logic and sentence structures, and how they really build the subtext of a piece. And I mean, early on in my own like research, I came across like what's hypotactic and paratactic structures. And I've mentioned this to you, Maureen, and I don't know if you've researched any more than what we've conversed, but I mean, okay, before I get into it, did you know these were the sentence structures that you were writing within?
No, I had no idea.
That's so cool. That's so cool that it kind of came naturally to you instead of, working at it. But what's truly wonderful is that the bulk of your protagonist speech, it's kind of a nod and a subversion of men speaking too much, because she takes the bulk of the conversation, which is very cheeky of you. But it's also written in this like hypotactic form. But it's also, but the tone is very associative and considered paratactic, because they're like loosely connected ideas but because the way the information is organized within the sentence structures, so like in that last sentence, I literally do not have the power to prevent you from writing poetry. That's the main point. Like your whole argument and all the subordinating causes are really supporting and lifting that one point up. And I kind of see it as like, body surfing at a concert. It's this, the one point, the one clause, the one main clause is surfing and being supported by all these hands, arms, and bodies, which also kind of makes me think of patriarchy and like power structures. And it's just this interesting and like thought-provoking way to write an argument that's subverting the argument that you're trying to make. And I've nerded out on this for weeks, and I would love to talk to other people about it, but they don't find these things interesting. So now I'm here talking about it to all of y'all. And I mean, it's so beautifully balanced.
Thank you.
Yeah. And like and so I just want to ask, like, what do you have to say for yourself, Maureen, for writing a brilliant kind of piece?
Oh, well, thank you for saying all that. Just a couple things on the question of sentence structure and hypotactic sentences. I had not heard the term before, so I promptly went and looked that up. And one thing that struck me as I was thinking about the structure you're talking about the sort of a lacing together of subordinate clauses. And that is something I did sort of pay attention to in my last semester with Kate Kennedy, who, you know, I was fortunate to work with for a whole year on my novel. And one of the things she pointed out to me was that, like, look, you know, you want to watch out for sentence structures that you replicate, that you tend to repeat over and over again, not just words, not just ideas, but literally, like, are you using a lot of subordinate clauses? Are you using conjunctions? What about the use of short independent sentences? And when she said that to me, it was revelatory. And it really did change my writing in those last few weeks of, you know, madly revising my thesis. And it has stuck with me always. So in that sense, I guess I would say, yeah, I have been sort of preoccupied with sentence structure for a long time now, because it's something that always plays a role in my revision process. In this particular case, it just kind of did come to me, but that said, it's always in the back of my mind, and that's perhaps where it arose from.
And did the flash form, is that something that you're used to writing in? And like when you were working on this piece?
No, to be really frank, this is my first flash piece published. I tend to write, when we have these generative writing sessions, I tend to write flash pieces. It's just how it comes out. There's something about the time constraint and a desire in me to have something complete, which is, you know, sometimes good, sometimes not good, right? So it's driven me in that direction. So, but this is my first flash piece published.
And you published it in Pinch, in the Pinch Journal. That's awesome. And is that one of your like dream publications?
Yeah, it was one of my dream publications. Yep. I had actually, just so everyone knows, this is my 7th submission to them that finally got published. And the one right before this was a nonfiction essay that I had written, and they sent me the most beautiful personal feedback, thoughtful feedback in the rejection. And I remembered that. And so I sent this totally other different piece to them. And that's what got accepted. So.
I wanted to ask, like, have you read like flash fiction, or I mean,
Yeah,
is that a form that you'd like to continue to write in?
It is. One of the things I've sort of been thinking about in the last year, now that I've spent some time deeply immersed in the writing of fiction, short fiction, in my novel, and thinking about, you know, future projects, is, you know, a little bit of genre bending, sort of like blurring some of those lines. I have deep respect for poets. I think the discipline of poetry is just incredible. So I would never dare think that I could like be a poet, but I do enjoy sort of messing about with the lines between fiction and nonfiction, between, you know, sort of notions of sort of like coherent narrative structure versus more destabilized structures, for lack of a better way of putting it. I am working right now on what I would call sort of like flash nonfiction essays that are autobiographical, that are paired with photos from my own life that I'm manipulating. sounds like a craft project, but it kind of is. But I'm really enjoying doing that. It's one of my projects, you know, that I'm working on, and I'm sending that out. There's not a lot of places that take hybrid forms like that, but that's something I'm kind of really into right now. So
hey, very cool. And before we move on, I wanted to also kind of bring up the point, as I like think about your story and your sentence structures and the use of this hierarchical syntax structure, which I don't want to generalize, but I feel like I've seen this structure used in like really heavy British and colonial-esque writing, and the fact that your protagonist is using the same language structure, but also from the beginning putting that language and structure back in the mouth of their date, is another loop that's being closed and being played. And I just wanted to congratulate you on that. That's very clever, Maureen.
Thanks. I will say very quickly, you know who else did that is William Faulkner did a lot of that in his writing. But you know, he was your classic white dude white dude writer. And, obviously Toni Morrison was very much influenced by William Faulkner. And so, there's all kinds of ways in which we can, like lots of people have done it. Greats have done it before us, right? Lots of people have appropriated and created beautiful things through those appropriations. So.
True.
Yeah.
And then I had a question on your last sentence, which is a question. When I was reading it, I thought, oh, why didn't the protagonist end it with "don't you think," and not instead of "what you think"? And I was curious to know like what your decision was for that.
It was about leaving an opening. It wasn't just a rant. It wasn't, just it was about leaving an opening. It was an opening for the person that the protagonist is speaking to engage, beyond, sort of the one person.
It ends on a note of hope.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, at least hope that the person reading, the person listening, who perhaps has not thought about this before in these particular kinds of ways, can start. So.
Awesome. Well, those are all the questions and craft things that I have. I'm going to open it up to the floor. And Michael Hahn, do you want to field the questions, or how do you want to go about doing this?
Yeah. Anybody want to drop a question in the chat? Go for it, Mike.
I just ask because my typing's terrible. Maureen, thank you so much for this, and it's an awesome piece, and I loved hearing you talk to Tina about it. When I heard you talking in your preface to it, and you're talking about if you are making not a point, but if you're addressing things like social structures, you almost have to come at it slant or disarm people. Would you mind talking briefly how much humor was being deployed in this piece to the
That is a great question. And hi, Mike, by the way. Thanks for the great question. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It is definitely a very humorous piece. It's intended to be humorous. It's intended, and I love your use of that word. It is intended to disarm, but it's intended to disarm in a way that I wanted to be very profoundly honest. I didn't want to pull punches at all. And, we pull punches when we have these conversations in real life, right? I find myself that I do. We want people, we don't like conflict. We don't like confrontation, a lot of us. And so this is a very confrontational piece. And I really wanted that confrontation. I wanted it to be clear and direct and straightforward. And I knew that humor, as I was writing it, would be one way to let the conversation be direct and straightforward, honest, not having to pull punches at all. So that's why I think humor is actually pretty important to this piece. So thank you for that question.
Thanks for that response, Maureen. Jill has a question. Have you pulled any flash pieces out of your novel, or written flash, and then added it to your novel?
That is a great question. I have, in fact, I published a short story in the Bellingham Review that one could argue is an assemblage of flash pieces. It's a bunch of little flashbacks from my novel, just the protagonist's memories of these different interactions with her mother from the age of like 3 to like 25. And they're very, very short. So in that sense, yeah, I guess I have. I would say I have not written flash pieces to put back into it, partially because that's not just like where I'm at right now. I'm revising it in a different kind of way. However, when I did write some of these flashback pieces, it was like Flash. Flashback and Flash obviously have a relationship to one another there. So yeah, that would be the process, I guess.
Awesome. Any other questions? Oh, that's it.
Awesome.
Maureen, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you,
sure.
Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It was wonderful.
And thank you, Atina.
You're welcome.
Well, let's move on to our next interviewer and interviewee couple. Kate Wiley, a 2023 grad, is a poet from St. Louis, Missouri, and is also the literary obituaries editor for Northwest Review and adjunct assistant professor of English at Webster University. They are the author of the Ozark Mountain Equestrian Club for Dead Men, great club, and the most recent Flower Mouth. Kate will be interviewing the sublime Allison Macy Steines. Kate, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. I am so excited to share the work of Allison Macy-Steins with you tonight. You've probably read this piece already. If you haven't, I'm so excited to be the one to introduce you to it. And Allison's going to read it for us. And Allison is, let me pull up her bio here. Sorry, guys, I have like 50 tabs open right now. Tab master. All right. Allison, I literally have it. Here we go. Okay. Allison Macy-Steins writes both prose and poetry, and she's passionate about bending the boundaries between genres. Macy-Steins earned her MFA in writing from Pacific University and holds a BA in journalism and media studies from UW-Milwaukee. She grew up in Rockford, Illinois, and now lives in Boring, Oregon, with her husband, daughter, and pup. And her daughter is the coolest person that has ever walked the planet, and she is the official pack mascot, Miss May Poetry. I'm really excited to introduce you to Allison Macy-Steins if you haven't met her already. Al?
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Who would we be if we didn't have 50 tabs open at all times? Actually, I'm going to be honest, I have 2 open right now, and I feel like so polished and put together in what is life. But it's only so I can stay organized and not like lose my head.
I have both screens. I have like 4, like it's HQ up in here. So thanks for letting me pull that up on my phone. But I'm so excited to talk to you. You and I have been ready for this for days. So do you want to read your poem first, and then we can, I'd love to have it out in the air just for people to hear, especially with all of the cool line breaks that you have. I would just love to hear it out of you. So would you read it for us?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect.
This is my one of 2 tabs. Collision of light and dark. In the corner of the arboretum, you push aside the weeping branches and step inside. The tree closes around you as if it were a curtain, a stanza, a secret. Overhead, the sun pierces through heart-shaped leaves, tiny cones of light, hundreds the size of coins, scattering across the shadowed contours of gnarled roots. Patches of moss, a nameplate that reads Amazing Grace, which suggests a variety of Katsura tree. But your mind already starts to build an image system, a web of association, without meaning to. Dark and light flickering side by side, disco ball dance floor, how you blinked at your reflection in the mirror the first time you saw your mascara run, squirming away from someone's hands, listening to the creaky rafters overhead in that dilapidated barn with its red, peeling paint. Later, much later, not that time matters. The distance of the North Tunnel on I-43 North, stretching and stretching until all feeling resides, praying he doesn't die, watching her chest stop rising, singing while it happens, singing together like your voices are the only sound in the world, or rather every sound in the world, wondering about dying yourself because the word bewilder has been quietly whispering, be wilder. The question of where to begin, of where to break a line of poetry, of why bother, glow in the dark stars, an infinite maze of possibility, trying to separate something, anything, please, you want water and oil, you need water and oil, but it's never that simple. Then finally, Only when you begin to feel too desperate, too full, like a balloon that might float away, you are left with this, luciferase, streaked across the sky at the peak of gloaming. That time you poked holes into the lid of a mason jar after chasing lightning bugs around the yard, their glowing bodies soft as whispers. Breath catches in your throat. You stop. Everything stops. Better. That's better. A single memory that lasts and keeps lasting. A single memory you can taste in your mouth even now. Its flavor alive. Its impression casting against the present, where under the tree you continue to examine each dash and dot of light, shimmering yellow and white, until slowly you arrive back inside this moment, which you imagine as a funnel for transparency, what it must feel like for tension and longing to dissolve, for chaos and ease to stop trying for the upper hand, to let grace become an experience. Before you part the branches and step back outside of the tree's embrace, you hold your hand toward a single prick of brightness. You feel it like the shape of a wound. You let it puncture you far into the future.
What a poem. Okay, so I mean, there's a million things we could talk about, right? But I think the best thing to talk about is play, right? Because you and I both know that's the best, most powerful part of poetry, right? So I think I would love for you to tell everybody about your desk. Because I think that's the best place to start. Will you educate everyone about your desk?
Yes. My desk is a fun mess. I've written a poem about my desk, but it's called Prayer Field. And I told Kate this already, but in an old copy of Writer's Digest, there's an agent interview with Rayhane Sanders, and she calls her desk her prayer field. And I just absolutely loved that. I came across that and I was like, okay, I'm also naming my desk the prayer field. I think it's absolutely beautiful. My desk has, as you saw earlier, little crown.
Miss May's crown. Yes, ma'am.
Has, I don't know, it has all sorts of stuff.
It's got all sorts of stuff on it. It is a cool desk. What does that say?
Mary Oliver sticky note, patch a few words together and don't try to make them elaborate. This isn't a contest, but a doorway into thanks. So I think everything that I sort of surround myself with here, even though I'll be honest, a lot of writing happens at my desk, but a lot of writing doesn't happen at my desk. It happens, like in bed, on the couch, on the go, on the back of a coloring book page, like wherever it can happen, it's happening.
Those coloring book pages are so helpful, aren't they? Oh my gosh. I love seeing the pictures of you sitting out there under that tree with the kid and the dog and the coloring book pages.
And that's get it out when you can.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's what Ruth Stone said, right? You're out in the field and you gotta catch it when it comes, right? And if you don't get it down that day, you didn't do your job. And that's what I love about you, right? You are always getting that shit down. Like no matter where it is, no matter what it is, you are getting it down. I see it so clearly in your craft, and especially in this poem, right? You have these coins that, not the coins in the poem, but these images and these lines are coins. They're little currencies, for you, and you've tucked them away like throughout years, and stored them like a squirrel does with like nuts, and you have done exactly what that Mary Oliver quote says. Actually, you've put all these things together into this quilt of a poem, and how, when you're working on that, how, though it is frustrating, I'm sure at times, as we all know, how does that become an act of play to you? Where do you see playtime happening at your desk when you're doing that work?
Oh, I mean, play shows up everywhere, right? I think especially being the mom of a toddler right now, like play infiltrates my life every second of every minute of every day. last week, my daughter looked at me for the first time, and sorry, there's going to be daughter stories in here. I can't help myself. It's where I'm at in life. Okay, so she looked at me for the first time, you guys, and she's like, Mama, can I tell you a story? And I was just like, I lost my cool. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first time my daughter has asked to tell me a story. So of course, you know, me being me, I'm like, yes, we got to write this down. Let's sit and write this down. So we sat together at the counter, and I was like, what is your story? So this is another thing at my desk today. Her story. Once upon a time, there was a mama princess. I get to be a mama princess. That's like my exclusive name I'm going by from now on these days. The princess sang Let It Go, then she danced. Mama princess had a horse who said nay. Mama princess and baby princess galloped all day. The end. So that's to say that, like, I think story and play are so closely related. I think story and play really come naturally to us. And I think children are really great teachers of how naturally that comes to us. It's like breath, you know, and story and play sort of open up the door to possibility. So when I look at how play infiltrates poetry, I see play as a place of possibility, not just as like an escape, but it's really rooted in a powerful place, right? Like play is a rebuttal to violence and trauma. It's a place to incite joy. With this poem that I just read, Collision of Light and Dark, it's a poem that's rooted in a lot of deep grief. But I think when I show up to write a poem, I use play, even like the line, the word bewilder, quietly whispering, be wilder, right? Like that.
Oh, what a line. What a line. I read that line. I went, God damn it. She's done it again. Allison Macy Steines. She wrote a perfect line of poetry again. What? Answer for your crimes. Like, that's crazy.
Oh, thanks.
Every time. She's so good at that.
It's just those little moments of where can we break language apart? Where can we try to piece it back together again? Where can we sort of stack it up like toy blocks and roll it around and like see what an utterance or a word or a phrase can hold and what it can't hold to. There's so much autobiographical detail that's not put into this poem, obviously, which I think is what's great about poetry too, is what's left out. But
yeah, because you get those real glimmers of autobiography in there that are so powerful, right? The oil and the water and the death and the, I mean, you have that trail, that breadcrumbing of, you know, a smart reader, an attentive reader. And that's, you know, of course, one of the tough parts about play too, and poetry, is that it's hard to find an attentive audience, right? It's hard to find American readers who have the time and the mental capacity and the willingness to slow down and play with you, right? And be like, you want to share your play with them, right? And that's really tough right now, and always maybe in America, to slow down and play, because it's exactly what you're saying, right? The active violence, right, is calling to us, right? It's like, focus on this, focus on the dark, right? And you're like, no, here's the light, bam, right? And you bring it in there. And I love the way you like dispel that the darkness, right? The collision is the light coming in to dispel the darkness, right? And that's so cool. And you do that in so many of your pieces. And I think that's what you're saying too about play, right? Like it can do everything if you let it, right?
Yeah, it can sort of be a way to live and love and exist. I mean, you asked me the question the other day whether I thought play was more of a noun or a verb, which I loved that question. And of course, like a super playful question. I was like, oh, it's a perfect question. So I just sat and rolled around with the question for a while. And I was like, first, immediately, I thought, like, my first gut reaction was, okay, all the way verb. You know, I play, we play, she plays, my daughter plays. And I think my mind started conjuring like all of these different activities, right? Bubbles, tea parties, playing dress up, like all of a sudden we're going to the grocery store in dress up clothes, like what's happening? But then I sat with your question a little bit longer and I started to realize, again, what I talked about earlier, that power in play. And I started to shift my sentences. So it wasn't a verb anymore. And it was play is this, play is that. So like, play is a way to exist. Play is a way to get back to presence. Like for me, if I'm feeling anxious or, you know, whatever the negative emotion that I'm feeling, play sort of recenters me. And so it really became a noun. And I think there was a really powerful realization in that. So that was a fun question. And thank you for asking me that, to think about this in advance. It was fun.
Well, and this kind of is our next question, right? Where did the Pacific, obviously, Dorianne has a lot of theory on play, right? Her, and she just put out that book of finger exercises for poets. My camera is like doing some crazy shit today. And she just put out that book about like play for poets, right? And so I think that's another part of it too, right? This question of, we learned from these people who were very influential to not just us, but the whole kind of realm of literary science, if you will. And so she, I think in particular, is somebody who really exemplifies this like idea of play. But maybe including or besides her, who would you say, or what would you say is something that you find regularly you're like, oh, that's Pacific, that's Boxer? Like I'm sure we all have those moments where we're like, oh, that's Box, like that's that's Pack U, like I got that from Pack U, right? Like I have things all the time. And I was just saying to a few people the other night, like it's very weird living out here in the Midwest. Like it's not like the coast at all. And so it's very weird. Like Mackenzie's kind of making a face. I think she understands what I mean. Like it's odd having gone and learned a lot of really cool stuff from a lot of really cool folks, and then bringing it back to like this kind of weird vortex in the Midwest. And I'm curious, like for you, who also lives in kind of a weird, it's boring Oregon vortex. How do you keep that alive? Like, how do you reignite that sense of play every day in your own little world?
Yeah, those are great questions. There was a few of them. I'm trying to parse them out. I think the first one you asked was about sort of Pacific influences, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, definitely Dorianne, Danusha for sure. I think Danusha's poetry for me is really rooted in a lot of opposition, which is something I'm really interested in too, joy and sorrow. What we're talking about here, play and stress or play and overwhelm, grief and joy, love and loss, all of these things that sort of feel like they should exist opposite of each other, but allow a balance, allow for those things to exist in harmony instead. I also think it's all the little moments, right? I mean, I could point to all the little moments with my daughter. I could point to any number of silly moments, but I mean, it's even this conversation, right? Like the packet exchanges at Pacific felt like little language play dates, if we're going to call them that, right? Like we got to ask questions and be curious and like just be in conversation about words, which is like, what's better than that? Like, what's more fun than that? And like this right now is a language play date. I mean, there's people in
a May date, as we
in
call
this
it,
gallery,
a May date.
I have a workshop I'm a part of from Pacific still, which is really great. It's once a month, and that sort of keeps that conversation alive for me too. I've been doing some collaborative writing projects, which, sorry to call you out, Mackenzie, but they have been some of the most like fruitful play-based writing things that I've ever done, and creating them has been just really,
I think I saw a picture of one of those. They were cool. The pink one, right? So cool.
So lots of play showing up in different places, I guess, to answer that part of your question. And I think there was another part, but you might have to
Yeah, how are you keeping it alive? I mean, but you've kind of already answered that, right? You have a kid, right? And how old of a toddler is she?
She's a baby.
Yeah, she's a baby. I mean, if you haven't seen the picture of baby May with her darling princess dress on, giving us the middle finger, our official Pack mascot, please, I implore you to go find Allison online. I'm sure the photo's there. But sweet baby May she's everything. But other than the kid, how do you keep the sense of play alive? I mean, especially the word play aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I guess my other biggest inspiration other than my daughter for play would be my sister. And you know, I guess memory too, memory, the past, even though that may sound counterintuitive. I think sometimes when I start to tip too far into one of those places, play has to stay alive because it has to pull me back out. I mean, my sister was nonverbal for most of her life. And so I think it allowed me, our relationship allowed me a place to really appreciate words in a different way, but also appreciate the space between words, and really have respect for what a word can hold and what, like I said earlier, what a word can't hold. And so I think that while, again, it's that opposition, right? It's that knowing that play is alive, it has to stay alive, right? It's an act of survival. I mean, I think I'm not unique in that. You know, we see this worldwide. We see this, with the natural disasters going on, with, the genocide in Gaza. We see this with policing of women's bodies in our own country. We see this on a global scale where there's such trauma and such pain and such horror going on that play has to exist. I mean, we need it. And so then turning it back into writing and poem and wordplay, it just sort of feels like necessity. I think storytelling on a larger aspect. I follow the photojournalist Lindsay Addario, and she recently just shared this absolutely like gutting, devastating collage of photos of this 6-year-old named Sonia, and she was receiving, I don't know, how many of you have already seen this, but she was receiving eye treatment for cancer in Ukraine during the Russian invasion, and she had a lapse in treatment. And the photos that Addario shared are basically, these tender photographs of Sonia and her mom. They're photographs of Sonia in the hospital bed. But there's the second photo that she shared in this collage is Sonia playing. Like she's on this swing. Like I literally saw this photo and I just started weeping. Her hair's flying back. She's got her legs kicked out. And it's like kind of a side profile, so you can't really see her face, right? But you can tell she's just smiling. And there's a sense of play there and a sense of freedom. And this is storytelling in a photograph, right? We're not talking about poetry anymore. But for me, that photograph just really, it encapsulated for me the necessity of play. Sorry, I just went on a very long rant there.
No, hey, thank you. I'm sure I'll appreciate it. I want to open it up for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand in the chat and Michael will call on you. Michael's more of an adult than me, so he does the calling on people, not me. But let us know if you have some questions. Allison is just about the coolest person that has ever lived. So I'm glad that she made a tiny Allison that we can all enjoy.
Can I say, speaking of wordplay?
Oh, thank you for the plug.
A lot of beautiful wordplay in Flower Mouth.
Thank you. That'll be a future installment of this lovely series that Michael, Han, and Petunia Atina have curated. I totally agree, Maureen. These conversations totally intersected really well, for sure. I heard somebody's Michael.
Until I was cut off so rudely.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's going to read, there's a question. Have you written anything from the POV of your child or any child?
From the point of view of my child, no. I've written lots of things about my daughter, a lot of like flash nonfiction pieces. I've been writing a lot of haibun, so like prose and haiku, just because it feels like a really sort of breathless, fun form to encapsulate parenthood. So I've written a lot of those about parenthood and my daughter, but nothing from her point of view from a child. So I think a lot of you know, when I was at Pacific, I was working on a memoir like largely about my sister's death and my brother's autoimmune condition and sort of like family medical trauma. And it's funny, before I decided I wanted to write that as a memoir, I was writing it from my sister's perspective. And I think it only came out that way first because I felt like I wanted to hear her voice for so long. And so obviously it was fiction, right? Like it's not like I could ever put myself fully inside what she was experiencing. But I think it came from a place of wanting to bridge that gap and wanting to empathize more with what she had experienced. So there's that, but I haven't really dabbled in that anytime recently. That was even before my time at Pacific. So I think that would be interesting, but no, not recently, Jill. Thanks for the question.
And last question, was this the first time you submitted to the Missouri Review?
No, I had submitted twice. So I had submitted twice, and because you know, with Missouri Review, you can submit like a ton of poems, which is like really neat. And I feel like it's neat too, because then you feel like you're actually giving them a flavor of like, you know, a variety of poems. And so the first time I got like a nice kind of, I'm assuming it was like a personalized letter. They had said that they wanted to, you know, me to submit again. So I think I submitted again after like a year, and then they picked up Collision of Light and Dark, which was just super exciting. It was Maureen, how you had said The Pinch was a dream publication for you. That was the Missouri Review for me too. So it's just sort of like a little like butterfly swimming around in your belly when that comes through, you know.
Thanks, Allison. This has been awesome. You're amazing.
Yeah. This has been a fun play date. And it's made like the first 5 minutes, I couldn't stop cheesing, just seeing everybody's faces in here. It made me so happy.
Yeah, this is a great crowd, and I'm glad that we got to do this for the first one. So thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.